I was 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean when I made the phone call that changed everything. My private jet was cutting through the night sky, the city lights of Los Angeles fading behind me as I headed to close the biggest deal of my career. But instead of reviewing contracts or preparing for the Tokyo meeting that would make me a billionaire, I was on hold with Wells Fargo, waiting to pay off a mortgage that wasn't mine. The mortgage that had been hanging over my parents' heads for 23 years. The same parents who, just 48 hours earlier, had told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner because my success made everyone else uncomfortable. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in Millfield, Ohio, population 8,400, I was Margaret Elena Rodriguez, the daughter of two high school teachers who believed that dreaming too big was just setting yourself up for disappointment. My mother, Linda Rodriguez, taught third grade at Millfield Elementary and spent her evenings grading papers at our scratched kitchen table under the flickering fluorescent light that Dad never bothered to fix. My father, Robert Rodriguez, coached JV basketball and taught American history to teenagers who couldn't care less about the Revolutionary War. They were good people, the kind who volunteered at church bake sales and never missed a parent-teacher conference. But they lived small lives by choice, wrapped in the comfort of routine and predictability. Every morning, Dad left at 7:15 a.m. sharp, coffee in his thermos, lunch packed in the same brown bag Mom had been using since I was in middle school. Mom followed at 7:30, her canvas tote stuffed with lesson plans and the eternal optimism that this would be the day she'd finally reach the kid in the back row who never did his homework. Dinner was at 6 p.m. every single night. Meatloaf on Mondays, tacos on Tuesdays, spaghetti on Wednesdays. The rhythm of their life was as predictable as the sunrise, and for years, I thought that's what happiness looked like. Small, safe, contained. I was their only child, born after Mom had 3 miscarriages that she never talked about, but whose ghost lingered in the careful way she treated me, like I might disappear if she held on too tightly or not tightly enough. They loved me fiercely, but quietly, the way people love things they're afraid to lose. In high school, I was the kid who raised her hand too much, stayed after class to ask questions, and spent Friday nights in the library instead of at football games. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, called me academically gifted, which in Millfield was code for different and not necessarily in a good way. While my classmates were planning which community college they'd attend or which local factory they'd work at after graduation, I was researching Ivy League schools and filling out scholarship applications by the dozens. My parents were proud, but in that worried way that parents get when their child shows signs of outgrowing them. They'd sit at the kitchen table, reading my acceptance letters from Harvard, Stanford, MIT, and instead of celebrating, they'd exchange these looks, concerned looks. The kind of looks that said they were losing me to a world they didn't understand and couldn't navigate. "Harvard's so far away, Mija," Mom would say, her voice careful and neutral, "and so expensive. Even with the scholarship, there are other costs, living expenses, books, flights home." Dad would nod along, adding practical concerns like a man building a wall, one brick at a time. "Ohio State has a great business program. You could live at home, save money, stay close to family." But I didn't want to close. I wanted vast. I wanted to see how far I could stretch before I broke, how high I could climb before the air got thin. At 18, sitting in our living room with acceptance letters spread across the coffee table like a winning hand of cards, I felt like a bird that had just realized it had wings. The night before I left for Harvard, we had dinner at Romano's, the nicest restaurant in Millfield, which wasn't saying much. It was the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and breadsticks that came free with every meal. Dad ordered his usual chicken parmesan. Mom got the seafood Alfredo she always said was too rich but ordered anyway on special occasions. "We're so proud of you," Mom said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her fingers were rough from years of hand sanitizer and dry erase markers, but her grip was firm. "Just remember where you come from." Dad raised his Budweiser, his 1 beer limit, and smiled.
To Margaret, don't forget about us little people when you're running Wall Street. He meant it as a joke, but even then, at 18, I could hear the undertone. The assumption that success would change me into someone they wouldn't recognize. Someone who might look back at Millfield, Ohio, and feel embarrassed rather than grateful. I laughed and clinked my Coke against his beer bottle. Never, I promised. And I meant it. College was everything I had dreamed and more. Harvard Business School opened doors I didn't even know existed. I learned about venture capital and private equity, about market disruption and scalable business models. I studied 18 hours a day and loved every minute of it. My professors saw something in me that even I was still discovering, a hunger that couldn't be satisfied with good grades or safe choices. During winter break of my sophomore year, I came home to Millfield with stories of internships at Goldman Sachs, networking events in Manhattan penthouses, professors who had advised Fortune 500 CEOs. I was bursting with excitement, desperate to share this new world I was discovering. But something had shifted, or maybe I was just noticing it for the first time. When I talked about my internship at the Christmas dinner table, describing the adrenaline rush of trading floors and billion-dollar deals, my parents listened with the polite attention they might give a foreign film with subtitles, interested but not quite following the plot. "That's nice, honey," Mom said, passing the mashed potatoes. "Just remember that money isn't everything. Your father and I have had a good life without chasing after millions." The comment stung, though I couldn't articulate why. It felt like she was diminishing not just my ambitions, but my entire experience, as if the past 2 years of my life had been some kind of elaborate phase I was going through. After dinner, I found myself in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by participation ribbons and honor roll certificates that suddenly felt small. The pink walls that I had once loved now seemed juvenile, the boy band posters an embarrassing reminder of who I used to be. I was changing, growing, evolving, but this room, this house, remained frozen in time. The pattern continued through college and into my early career. I'd come home for holidays with stories of promotions, successful deals, the startup I was launching with 2 MIT grads I'd met at a conference. But instead of celebration, I was met with gentle warnings about getting too big for my britches, about not forgetting my roots. When I made my first million at 28, selling a tech company I'd built from scratch to Google, I drove straight to Millfield to share the news. I found my parents in their usual spots, Mom grading papers, Dad watching ESPN, and announced that I could finally pay off their mortgage, could send them on the European vacation Mom had always talked about but never believed she'd afford. Dad muted the television and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "That's generous of you, Margaret, but we don't need your charity." The word hit me like a slap. Charity. As if my success, my desire to share it with the people who had raised me, was somehow insulting. "It's not charity, Dad. It's gratitude. It's me wanting to give back to the people who made everything possible." Mom looked up from her papers, her face tired in the way that teachers get tired in December, when the semester feels endless and the kids are thinking more about Christmas than fractions. "We appreciate the thought, Miha, but we've always paid our own way. We're not comfortable with handouts, even from family, especially from my family."
That night, lying in my childhood bed that felt too small for the person I had become, I realized something that would take me years to fully understand. My parents weren't proud of my success. They were threatened by it. Every achievement, every milestone, every zero added to my net worth was a reminder of how different our worlds had become. But I told myself it didn't matter. I had work to do, companies to build, deals to close. I threw myself into my career with the intensity of someone trying to outrun something they couldn't name. By 30, I had launched and sold 3 companies. By 32, I was managing a hedge fund that consistently outperformed the market. By 34, I was appearing on CNBC, Forbes was calling me a visionary, and I had enough money to buy and sell small countries. The distance between Millfield and my life in Manhattan grew wider with each passing year. Phone calls became monthly, then quarterly. Visits home were brief, squeezed between board meetings and international flights. But I always came back for Christmas. It was our tradition, our one unbreakable connection to who we used to be together. It was December 18th when everything changed.
I was in my corner office on the 47th floor of the Chrysler Building, watching the snow fall on Manhattan while finalizing the acquisition of a renewable energy company that would add another billion to my portfolio. My assistant, Jennifer, knocked and entered with that careful expression she wore when delivering news that might disrupt my schedule. "Your mother called," she said, holding out a pink message slip. "She said it's about Christmas arrangements." I glanced at my Rolex, 3:47 p.m. Mom would be home from school by now, probably starting dinner prep while Dad caught the sports highlights he'd missed during the day. I picked up my phone and dialed their landline, the same number they'd had since I was 12. "Rodriguez residence, Linda speaking." Even after all these years of wealth and success, hearing my mother's voice still transported me back to that small house with the creaky stairs and the kitchen that always smelled like whatever she was cooking for dinner. "Hi, Mom. Jennifer said you called about Christmas."
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. There was a pause, longer than usual, and I could hear Dad's voice in the background asking who was on the phone. "Yes, well, about that." Mom's voice had taken on that careful tone she used when she was about to deliver news she knew I wouldn't like. "Your father and I have been talking, and we've decided to do something different this year." I spun my chair around to face the window, watching a helicopter circle the Empire State Building. Different how? "We're going to have a quiet Christmas, just family. Your cousin Danny is bringing the kids, and your Uncle Miguel is driving down from Cleveland. We thought it would be nice to keep things intimate." The word hung in the air like smoke. Intimate. As if my presence somehow contaminated the atmosphere, made it less pure. "I see," I said, though I didn't see it all. "And I'm not family?" "Of course you're family, mija. But..." Another pause. I could practically hear her choosing her words like she was diffusing a bomb. "You know how it is when you come home. Everything becomes about your job, your deals, your airplane. The kids spend the whole time asking about your money instead of focusing on what Christmas is really about." My hand tightened around the phone. "My airplane?" "You know what I mean. Last year, little Sophia spent the entire dinner asking why you had a private jet when her daddy had to take out a loan just to fix their car. It made everyone uncomfortable." I thought back to last Christmas, when my 7-year-old cousin had peppered me with questions about my Gulfstream G650. I'd answered honestly, explained that I worked hard and had been fortunate in business. I'd even offered to take the family on a trip to Disney World, all expenses paid. The adults had changed the subject quickly, as if I'd suggested something inappropriate. "So you're uninviting me to Christmas because I make people uncomfortable?" "We're not uninviting you," Dad's voice cut in. He'd picked up the extension in the kitchen, his tone carrying that forced patience he used with particularly difficult students. "We're just thinking it might be better if you did your own thing this year. You've got that big life in New York. Surely you have fancy parties to attend, important people to see." The dismissal in his voice was like a physical blow. Your big life. As if everything I'd built, everything I'd achieved was just an elaborate performance designed to show off. "I don't want fancy parties," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "I want to come home and have Christmas dinner with my parents, like we've done every year since I was born." "And we want that too," Mom said quickly. "But Margaret, you have to understand how it feels for everyone else. Your cousin Danny is still paying off his student loans. Miguel's been laid off twice this year. When you show up talking about buying companies and flying to Tokyo for meetings, it makes them feel like their lives don't matter." I stood up and walked to my window, looking down at the people moving like ants on the sidewalk 47 floors below. Each one of them had dreams, goals, and families they wanted to provide for. I'd started with less than most of them and worked my way up through 18-hour days, sleepless nights, and risks that would have terrified anyone with sense. But somehow, in my parents' eyes, that made me the villain. "I never said their lives didn't matter." "You don't have to say it," Dad replied. "It's in everything you do. The way you dress, the way you talk about money like it's nothing.
Last Christmas, you offered to pay for Sophia's college education like you were offering to buy her a candy bar. That's not normal, Margaret. Since when is wanting to help your family not normal? Since it stopped being helpful and started being a reminder of everything we don't have. The words hit me like I'd been slapped. I sat back down in my chair, staring at my reflection on the computer screen. When did helping become hurting? When did success become a crime? So what are you saying exactly? Mom took a deep breath. We're saying, maybe you should skip Christmas this year. Give everyone a chance to just be together without the pressure. The pressure of what? Of trying to measure up to you, Dad said flatly. Of feeling like failures because we chose teaching over trading stocks. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I never asked you to measure up to anything. I never said teaching was less important than what I do. You didn't have to say it, Mom whispered. It's written all over your face every time you come home. The way you look at our house, our car, our lives, like you're visiting a museum of how you used to live before you became important. That accusation hung in the air like poison gas. I thought about every homecoming, every dinner conversation, every careful compliment I'd paid about the house, the town, their work. Had I really looked at them like museum pieces? Or were they so insecure about their choices that they couldn't stand to be around someone who'd made different ones? That's not true. Dad's voice was getting harder now, the way it got when he was disciplining a student who wouldn't admit they'd cheated on a test. When's the last time you asked about Mom's classroom, about my basketball team, about anything in our lives that didn't involve you writing a check to fix it? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't. When was the last time? When had our conversations stopped being about their lives and started being about mine? When had I stopped asking and started telling? I care about your lives. You care about improving our lives, Mom corrected. There's a difference. You can't just accept that we're happy the way we are. Are you happy? I asked. Really? With the leaky roof you've been talking about fixing for 3 years? With Dad's back problems that he won't see a specialist for because insurance won't cover it? Driving that car that breaks down every other month? Yes, Dad said, and the conviction in his voice surprised me. We are happy because we earned what we have. We don't owe anyone anything. We sleep well at night knowing that everything in our house, everything in our life, we worked for. And you think I didn't work for what I have? We think you got lucky, Mom said softly. And luck makes people feel entitled, makes them think they're better than everyone else. The accusation landed like a punch to the stomach. Lucky. 30 years of building companies, creating jobs, surviving market crashes and hostile takeovers, and they thought it was luck? I see, I said. So I'm banned from Christmas because I'm lucky, entitled, and I make people uncomfortable. You're not banned, Mom protested. We just think— No, I interrupted. I understand perfectly. You're ashamed of me. You're ashamed that your daughter became more successful than you thought she had the right to be. And instead of being proud, you've decided I'm the problem. Margaret, that's not— I hung up the phone. I sat in my office as the sky outside grew dark, the city lights beginning to twinkle like earthbound stars. My phone buzzed with texts, emails, meeting requests, but I ignored them all. For the first time in 20 years, I had nowhere to go for Christmas. The family that had raised me, that I'd spent my entire adult life trying to honor and support, had decided I was too much trouble to deal with. My parents had just taught me something about family that all my business school education had missed. Sometimes, the people who should be proudest of you are the ones who can't forgive you for becoming more than they ever dreamed you could be. The silence in my office was deafening after I hung up the phone. Outside my windows, Manhattan hummed with its usual December energy. Last-minute shoppers rushing through the streets, office parties spilling out of corporate buildings, the whole city wrapped in that particular magic that only comes when 8 million people are all thinking about going home for the holidays. But I had no home to go to, not anymore. I sat there for an hour, maybe 2, watching the city lights blur together as my eyes filled with tears I hadn't expected. When was the last time I cried? Actually cried, not just gotten misty during a sentimental movie or a particularly moving piece of music. I couldn't remember. Successful people don't cry, I've learned. We adapt, we strategize, we overcome. But apparently, we don't cry. My phone buzzed incessantly, Jennifer probably wondering why I hadn't responded to the stack of urgent emails that had come in. Board members wanting updates on the Tokyo deal, investors eager for year-end reports. My assistant at the Hamptons house asked about holiday catering arrangements that now seemed pointless. The world expected Margaret Rodriguez to be available, decisive, unshakable. That Margaret Rodriguez was falling apart in a leather chair 47 floors above a city that suddenly felt very cold. I thought about calling them back, apologizing, promising to be different, smaller, less threatening. I could show up to Christmas dinner in clothes from Target instead of Armani. I could talk about the weather instead of my work. I could pretend to be the person they wanted me to be, the one who had never left Millfield, never reached beyond what they thought I deserved. But even as the thought crossed my mind, something deeper rebelled against it. Why should I apologize for working hard? Why should I diminish myself to make others feel better about their choices? I'd never asked anyone to feel bad about their life. I'd only tried to share the good fortune that hard work had brought me. My mind drifted to a conversation I'd had with my mentor, Elena Vasquez, 3 years earlier. Elena was the CEO of a Fortune 100 company, a woman who'd built an empire while raising 3 kids and caring for aging parents. We'd been at a conference in Davos, sitting in a quiet corner after a particularly brutal panel on women in leadership. "You know what no one tells you about success?" she'd said, swirling the wine in her glass. "The higher you climb, the lonelier it gets. Not because there aren't people around you, there are always people around successful women, but because the people who love you sometimes can't follow you where you're going, and they resent you for going there without them." I nodded politely at the time, thinking it was sage advice that didn't really apply to me. My family loved me. We had a bond that transcended money or status. But sitting in my office with my parents' words still echoing in my ears, I finally understood what Elena had meant. My family didn't love who I'd become. They loved who I used to be. The woman who used to ask for permission before making decisions. The woman who accepted limitations as facts rather than challenges to overcome. The woman who believed that wanting more was somehow selfish, that ambition was a character flaw rather than a driving force. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Dr. Patricia Stone, the therapist I'd seen briefly 2 years earlier when the stress of running 3 companies simultaneously had started affecting my sleep. I'd stopped going once the immediate crisis passed, telling myself I didn't have time for self-reflection. Successful people don't need therapy, they need results. But maybe successful people who were sitting alone in their offices on December 18th, banned from their own family's Christmas dinner, needed something different. I typed out a text. "Hi, Dr. Stone. This is Margaret Rodriguez. I know it's short notice, but do you have any availability this week? I think I need to talk." Her response came back within minutes. "Margaret, good to hear from you. I have an opening tomorrow at 2 p.m. if that works. Sometimes the holidays bring up more than we expect them to." Sometimes the holidays bring up more than we expect them to, if that wasn't the understatement of the year. That night, I went home to my penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, 12,000 square feet of marble and mahogany, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, art that museums would kill for, hanging on walls that most people would never see. I walked through rooms that could house entire families, past a kitchen that rarely saw cooking, up a staircase that led to a master suite larger than the house I'd grown up in. For the first time since I'd bought the place, it felt empty. Not elegant or spacious or impressive, just empty. I poured myself a glass of wine, a 1982 Bordeaux, that cost more than my father made in a week, and stood at my living room window looking down at Central Park. Somewhere below me, families were walking together, parents pushing strollers, couples holding hands, kids running ahead on the paths while their parents called after them to be careful. I'd traded all of that for this isolation, this success that nobody in my life seemed capable of celebrating. My phone rang, and for a moment my heart jumped, thinking it might be Mom calling to apologize, to say they'd reconsidered, that of course I was welcome at Christmas dinner. But it was Jason Chen, my business partner on the Tokyo deal. Margaret, we need to talk about the Nakamura meeting. They're asking for additional concessions on the renewable energy patents, and I think we should. Jason, I interrupted, can this wait until after Christmas? There was a pause on the other end. Jason and I had worked together for 5 years, and I'd never once suggested that business wait for a holiday. Is everything okay? I almost laughed. Was everything okay? I was worth $3 billion, controlled companies that employed thousands of people, had influence in boardrooms from New York to Hong Kong, and I was spending Christmas alone because my own parents thought I was too successful to deserve their love? Everything's fine, I lied. Just trying to enjoy the holiday season. Okay, well, the Nakamura thing can probably wait until the 26th. But Margaret, are you sure you're all right? You sound different. Different? There was that word again. When did it become such a crime? After I hung up with Jason, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my college roommate, Sarah Wellington. Sarah had married her college boyfriend, moved to Oregon, and spent her days teaching yoga and raising 2 kids. We'd stayed in touch sporadically over the years, but the gap between our lives had grown so wide that conversation had become increasingly difficult. Margaret, Sarah's voice was warm, but surprised. Oh my God, how are you? I saw that article about you in Forbes last month. Incredible stuff. Thanks. Listen, I know this is random, but what are you doing for Christmas? The usual chaos. David's parents are coming up from California, my sister's bringing her new boyfriend, and the kids are convinced Santa is bringing them a pony because I made the mistake of saying, "we'll see," when they asked for one 3 months ago. She laughed, the sound easy and genuine. Why? Please tell me you're not calling us all to some exotic resort or something. The comment stung more than it should have. Even Sarah, who'd known me before I had money, seemed to think wealth was my solution to everything. No, nothing like that. I paused, not sure how to explain. Do you ever feel like success came at a cost you didn't expect to pay? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Margaret, are you okay? You sound sad.
Sad? When was the last time someone had simply asked if I was sad? My parents uninvited me from Christmas, I heard myself say. They think I make everyone uncomfortable. What? That's insane. You're their daughter. Apparently, I'm their daughter who got too big for her britches and now makes everyone else feel bad about their lives. That's their problem, not yours, Sarah said firmly. Margaret, I've known you since you were 18 years old. You're one of the most generous, hardworking people I've ever met. If your parents can't see that, if they can't be proud of what you've accomplished, then that's their loss. Her words should have made me feel better, but instead they crystallized something I'd been avoiding. This wasn't just about Christmas dinner. This was about fundamental incompatibility. My parents and I had grown into people who couldn't exist comfortably in the same space. They saw my success as judgment. I saw their limitations as choices. They valued stability. I valued growth. They were content. I was driven. And maybe that was okay. Maybe not every relationship was meant to survive radical transformation. Maybe some people were only meant to love you for a season, not a lifetime. The thought was both liberating and devastating. After I hung up with Sarah, I made a decision. I wasn't going to spend Christmas feeling sorry for myself. I wasn't going to apologize for who I'd become or pretend to be smaller to make others comfortable. But I also wasn't going to let this betrayal pass without consequences. My parents had taught me that family loyalty was conditional, that love could be withdrawn when it became inconvenient. Fine. But they were about to learn that Margaret Rodriguez was not someone you discarded lightly. I opened my laptop and began making calls. Not to beg or bargain or try to change their minds,
but to show them exactly what they'd chosen to throw away, and to ensure they understood the true cost of their decision. By the time I went to bed that night, I'd made arrangements that would change everything. Because if my parents wanted to treat me like a stranger, then perhaps it was time they discovered what it felt like when a very powerful stranger decided to pay attention to their lives. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes after a night of terrible sleep and life-changing decisions. I had my session with Dr. Stone at 2 p.m., but first, I had work to do. The kind of work that required the full resources of someone who owned companies in 12 countries and had enough liquid capital to buy small nations. I started with a phone call to Marcus Thompson, my head of private investigations. Marcus was ex-FBI, the kind of man who could find out what someone had for breakfast 3 years ago if you gave him enough time and motivation. His firm, Blackstone Research, handled sensitive matters for Fortune 500 companies and individuals who needed information gathered discreetly. Marcus, it's Margaret Rodriguez. I need a complete financial analysis on 2 individuals in Millfield, Ohio, Robert and Linda Rodriguez. Parents, teachers, homeowners. I want to know everything: mortgage balance, credit score, outstanding debts, insurance policies, employment contracts, pension plans, medical bills, everything. Marcus didn't ask questions. In his line of work, wealthy clients wanting background checks on family members wasn't unusual. Divorce proceedings, inheritance disputes, custody battles, money made people paranoid, and paranoia kept people like Marcus in business. How soon do you need this? End of business today. That's a rush job. It'll cost extra. Bill me whatever you need to bill me. I want details down to their grocery store loyalty card balances. While Marcus worked on gathering intelligence, I made my second call to Amanda Foster, my personal banker at J.P. Morgan Chase Private Client Services. Amanda managed portfolios for people who could buy and sell companies on a whim, and she was accustomed to unusual requests. Amanda, I need you to pull up all the financial institutions in Millfield, Ohio. The population is about 8,000, so there can't be many. I want to know which banks service that area, particularly mortgage lending. Are you looking to acquire something in that market? Something like that. I also need you to prepare a wire transfer authorization form for exactly $247,823.67. The recipient will be Wells Fargo Home Mortgage Division, account details to follow. I could hear Amanda typing, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her keyboard. That's a very specific amount. It will be when I get the exact payoff figure. My third call was to David Kim, my real estate attorney. David specialized in complex property transactions and had handled everything from my Manhattan penthouse to my vineyard in Sonoma County. David, I need you to research property records in Millfield, Ohio, specifically 1247 Maple Street. I want to know the purchase date, original mortgage amount, current estimated value, property tax assessments for the last 5 years, and any liens or judgments against the property. Are you looking to purchase this property? I'm looking to understand it completely. By noon, the pieces were falling into place. Marcus had sent over a comprehensive financial profile that made for fascinating reading. My parents, it turned out, lived exactly as I expected, paycheck to paycheck, despite 40 years of steady employment. Their mortgage had an outstanding balance of $247,823, with monthly payments of $1,847 that consumed nearly half of their combined take-home pay. They had $12,000 in savings, a car loan for Dad's 10-year-old Honda, and Mom had been quietly paying $380 toward credit card debt she'd accumulated during Dad's back surgery 2 years earlier. They weren't poor, but they weren't comfortable either. They were house-rich and cash-poor, like millions of Americans who'd bought at the wrong time and spent decades paying for the privilege of calling something their own. David's property research confirmed what I'd suspected. They'd bought the house in 1987 for $89,000, which seemed like a fortune to 2 young teachers at the time. They'd refinanced twice, once to pay for my college expenses that scholarships didn't cover, and once during Dad's surgery to pay for medical bills. The house was now worth approximately $340,000, which meant they had about $90,000 in equity trapped in a home they couldn't afford to sell because they wouldn't be able to find anything cheaper in the same area. But the most interesting piece of information came from Marcus's deep dive into their employment contracts. Both my parents were part of the Ohio Teachers' Retirement System, which meant their pensions were guaranteed but modest. More importantly, their employment contracts contained morality clauses, standard language that allowed the school district to terminate teachers who engaged in behavior that reflected poorly on the institution. I made one more call, this one to my travel coordinator. Helen, I need the jet prepped for departure tomorrow morning. The destination will be Toledo Executive Airport. I'll need ground transportation arranged to Millfield, Ohio, about an hour southeast. Something understated, a Lincoln or Mercedes, not a Bentley. How long will you be staying? Just the day. I'll be flying back to New York tomorrow evening. At 2 p.m. sharp, I was sitting in Dr. Stone's office, a warm space filled with books and soft lighting that was supposed to make people feel safe enough to expose their deepest vulnerabilities. Dr. Stone was in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of steady gaze that suggested she'd heard everything and judged nothing. You sounded distressed in your text, she said, settling into her chair across from me.
I told her about the phone call, about Christmas being canceled, about the conversation that had revealed how my family really saw me. I expected her to offer sympathy, to validate my hurt feelings, to tell me my parents were wrong. Instead, she asked, "What are you planning to do about it?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm sorry?" In our previous sessions, you mentioned that when you feel powerless, you tend to take action to regain control, usually dramatic action. What are you planning to do about this situation? I hesitated. Dr. Stone had an uncanny ability to see through my carefully constructed defenses. "I'm going to pay off their mortgage." That sounds generous. Without their permission, without their knowledge, I'm going to call Wells Fargo tomorrow and pay the entire balance in full. Dr. Stone nodded slowly. And then what? And then they'll realize what they threw away. They'll understand that their daughter, the one they're too ashamed to have at Christmas dinner, just freed them from 23 years of debt. They'll have to live with the knowledge that the person they rejected was trying to give them the financial security they've struggled for their entire adult lives. And how do you think they'll feel about that? Terrible, guilty, like the small-minded people they've revealed themselves to be. Dr. Stone was quiet for a moment, the kind of therapeutic silence that was designed to make patients fill the space with truth. "Margaret, what is it you really want from your parents?" The question hit me like a physical blow. What did I want? Their love, their approval, their acknowledgement that I'd become someone worth celebrating rather than hiding? "I want them to be proud of me," I heard myself say. "I want them to look at what I've accomplished and feel pride instead of shame. I want them to tell their friends about their daughter who built companies and created jobs and changed lives. Instead, they act like my success is a personal insult to their choices. And paying off their mortgage will accomplish that? It will force them to acknowledge what they've lost. It will make them confront the fact that they rejected someone who was trying to take care of them." Dr. Stone leaned forward slightly. "Or it will confirm their worst fears about you." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "Think about it from their perspective. They've just told you that your money makes them uncomfortable, that your success feels like judgment, and your response is to use your wealth to solve their biggest financial problem without their consent. How is that different from what they've been complaining about?" The truth of her words hit me like a freight train. My parents saw my success as controlling, overwhelming, diminishing, and I was about to prove them right by using my money to force a resolution they didn't want. But even as I recognized the logic, another part of me rebelled against it. So I'm supposed to do nothing? I'm supposed to let them reject me and just accept it? I'm suggesting you think carefully about what you hope to accomplish, because power moves often create the opposite of what we intend. I left Dr. Stone's office more conflicted than when I'd arrived, but my mind was already made up. Sometimes relationships can't be repaired with understanding and communication. Sometimes they required shock and awe. Sometimes people needed to be shown exactly what they were throwing away before they could appreciate what they'd had. That evening, I finalized the details with Amanda. The wire transfer was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning, as soon as the banks opened. By the time my parents woke up on December 20th, their mortgage would be history. I also made one additional arrangement, something Dr. Stone would probably call a power move, but I prefer to think of it as clarity. I hired a local videographer in Toledo to document the moment my parents received the news, not for public consumption, but for my own records.
I wanted to see their faces when they realized what had happened. I wanted to capture the moment they understood the cost of their decision. Because sometimes the only way to win a game is to change the rules entirely. And Margaret Rodriguez had just rewritten the playbook on family dynamics. Tomorrow, I will fly home to Ohio one last time, not as a rejected daughter begging for acceptance, but as a powerful woman delivering a message that couldn't be ignored. They wanted me out of their lives? Fine, but they were going to remember exactly who they'd chosen to lose. December 20th dawned gray and cold in New York, the kind of winter morning that makes you want to stay in bed with coffee and regrets. But I was already dressed and ready by 6 a.m., wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit and the diamond earrings I'd bought myself after my first billion-dollar deal. If I was going to destroy my relationship with my parents, I was going to look impeccable while doing it. My driver picked me up at 6:30 for the ride to Teterboro Airport, where my Gulfstream was fueled and waiting. The flight crew knew better than to make small talk when I had that particular expression on my face, the one my board members called Margaret's scorched earth look. At exactly 9 a.m., while cruising at 37,000 feet over Pennsylvania, I called Amanda at J.P. Morgan Chase. "It's done," she said without preamble. "The wire transfer went through 20 minutes ago. Wells Fargo Home Mortgage Division has received $247,000.67 for the complete payoff of the Robert and Linda Rodriguez mortgage account. They should receive official notification within the hour." I looked out the window at the farmland below, tiny squares of brown and white stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere down there, people were going about their Thursday morning routines, completely unaware that their worlds were about to shift. In about 30 minutes, my parents would get a phone call that would change everything. "Thank you, Amanda. Wire an additional $50,000 to their checking account at First National Bank of Millfield. Reference it as a holiday gift from M. Rodriguez." Consider it done. Is there anything else? Not today. The flight to Toledo took 2 hours. I spent them reviewing the research Marcus had compiled and making final arrangements with the videographer, a local freelancer named Kevin Walsh, who thought he was documenting a surprise family reunion for my documentary project. Kevin would be positioned across the street from 1247 Maple Street by 2 p.m. with telephoto lenses and audio equipment sensitive enough to pick up conversations through windows. My ground transportation was waiting at Toledo Executive, a black Mercedes S-Class with tinted windows, and a driver who'd been briefed to remain completely invisible. The hour-long drive to Millfield gave me time to think about what I was about to do, to maybe reconsider the nuclear option I'd chosen. But every time I wavered, I heard my father's voice. "We think you got lucky. Luck makes people feel entitled." My mother's words. "We're not comfortable with handouts, even from family." They'd made their position clear. They were an embarrassment, a reminder of everything they didn't have, a daughter who'd grown too big for the small life they'd chosen. Fine, but they were about to learn what it felt like when that embarrassing daughter decided to get involved in their finances, whether they liked it or not. Millfield looked exactly as I remembered it, a town frozen in time, where the biggest excitement was the Friday night high school football game, and the most controversial debate was whether the library should stay open past 7 p.m. I had the driver park at a diner on Main Street, 2 blocks from my parents' house, and ordered coffee I didn't want while I waited. At 1:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. "In position. Clear sightlines to the front and side of the target residence."
At 1:52 p.m., another text from Amanda. "Confirmation received. Both wire transfers were processed successfully. The mortgage account shows zero balance. The checking account shows a deposit of $50,000. At 1:56 p.m., Kevin again. "White Honda Civic pulling into driveway. Male driver matches the photo you provided." My father was home from school. Good. I wanted them both there for this. I sat in the diner, nursing cold coffee and watching the clock on my phone. 2:15 p.m., 2:30 p.m. At 2:43 p.m., Kevin's text made my pulse quicken. Phone ringing inside house. The female subject answered. Conversation in progress. I could picture it perfectly. Mom would be in the kitchen, probably starting dinner prep, when the landline rang. The voice on the other end would be professional, courteous, congratulatory. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Jennifer Martinez from Wells Fargo Home Mortgage Division. I'm calling with some wonderful news. Your mortgage account has been paid in full. 2:46 p.m. Male subject has joined the female in the kitchen. Both appear agitated. Animated conversation in progress. 2:48 p.m. Female subject on phone again. Different conversation. Maybe checking with the bank, perhaps? Mom would be calling First National, asking about the deposit in their checking account. The customer service representative would confirm that yes, $50,000 had been deposited that morning, wired from J.P. Morgan Chase Private Banking, with the reference, holiday gift from M. Rodriguez. 2:52 p.m. Both subjects are now in the living room, male subject pacing, the female subject sitting, appears distressed. I paid for my coffee and walked back to the Mercedes. It was time for the final act. Drive to 1247 Maple Street, I told my driver. Park directly in front of the house. The drive took 3 minutes. As we pulled up, I could see my parents through the living room window, exactly as Kevin had described. Dad was pacing, his hands gesturing wildly in the way they did when he was trying to solve a problem that had no clear solution. Mom was sitting on the couch, holding what looked like bank statements, her face pale. I texted Kevin, "I'm going in, keep recording." I stepped out of the Mercedes, my heels clicking against the concrete driveway I'd walked thousands of times as a child. The sound echoed in the cold December air like gunshots. My parents' voices were audible through the storm door, Dad's frustrated baritone and Mom's higher-pitched anxiety blending into the kind of argument that happens when people are scared and don't know who to blame. I didn't knock. I used the spare key that had been hidden under the same garden gnome since I was in high school, the one Mom thought no one knew about, but which had saved me from being locked out countless times during my teenage years. The door opened silently, and I stepped into the house I'd grown up in. It smelled the same, Mom's vanilla candles and the faint scent of whatever she'd cooked for lunch. But the atmosphere was electric with tension. "I don't understand how this happened," Dad was saying. "Banks don't just pay off mortgages. There has to be some mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said, stepping into the living room doorway. They both turned toward me, their faces cycling through confusion, shock, and something that might have been recognition of exactly how much trouble they were in. "Margaret?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I came to deliver your Christmas present," I said, my voice calm and pleasant, as if I were commenting on the weather. Dad's face was turning red, the way it did when one of his students had pushed him too far. "You did this. You paid off our mortgage." "I did. $247,823.67, plus a little something extra in your checking account for incidentals." Mom stood up, the bank statements fluttering to the floor. "We told you we didn't want your charity." "And I told you it wasn't charity, it was gratitude. But since you've made it clear that my gratitude is unwelcome, let me explain what this actually is." I walked further into the room, noting how everything looked smaller than I remembered. The couch where I'd done homework, the television where we'd watched Disney movies, the dining room table where we'd shared thousands of meals. All of it miniature, like a dollhouse version of my childhood. "This is a demonstration," I continued. "You said I make people uncomfortable. You said my money is the problem. You said I've forgotten where I come from and that I think I'm better than everyone else. So I thought I'd show you exactly what happens when someone like me decides to get involved in your lives." Dad took a step toward me, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually swing at me. "How dare you? How dare you go behind our backs and what? Help you? Take care of you? Use my resources to solve the biggest financial stress in your lives?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're right, Dad. How terrible of me." "That's not the point," Mom said, her voice shaking. "The point is that you did this without asking. You forced this on us." "The way you forced me out of Christmas dinner without asking if I wanted to be excluded?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. We all stood there, 3 people who shared DNA and a history, but who had become strangers pretending to be family. "You want to know what I learned from all this?" I said, my voice getting quieter, more dangerous. "I learned that you're not proud of me.
You're afraid of me. You're so terrified of admitting that your daughter became more successful than you ever dreamed that you'd rather push me away than deal with your own insecurity. That's not true, Mom whispered. Isn't it? You banned me from Christmas because my success makes other people uncomfortable, because I have the audacity to offer help to family members who are struggling, because I've committed the unforgivable sin of achieving more than you thought I deserved. I pulled out my phone and showed them the banking confirmations Amanda had sent. Well, congratulations. You're now the proud owners of a house with no mortgage, you have $50,000 in your checking account, you are financially secure for the first time in your adult lives, and you didn't have to ask for it, or accept it, or even acknowledge it. Dad was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You can't just do this to people. I can do anything I want. That's what $3 billion means. That's the power you've been so afraid of. And now you get to live with the consequences of rejecting someone who had that power and wanted to help you. I turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back at them one more time. Oh, and Mom, Dad, Merry Christmas. I hope you enjoy your mortgage-free holiday dinner with the family members who aren't too successful to deserve a seat at your table. The silence that followed me out of that house was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I walked out of that house with my head held high, but my hands were shaking by the time I reached the Mercedes. The driver, trained in the discretion that comes with serving wealthy clients, said nothing as I slid into the back seat and closed my eyes. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was already beginning to fade, leaving behind something that felt suspiciously like regret. But regret was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not yet. Take me back to the airport, I told the driver, but make one stop first. The Millfield Elementary School. I had one more message to deliver. Kevin texted me as we drove. Subjects remained in the living room for approximately 10 minutes after your departure. The female subject appeared to be crying. Male subject made a phone call, lasting approximately 5 minutes. Both subjects then moved to the kitchen, out of visual range. The elementary school was exactly as I remembered it. A single-story brick building with colorful cutouts in the windows and a playground that had seen better decades. It was 3:45 p.m., which meant the kids had been dismissed, but the teachers would still be there, cleaning up their classrooms and preparing for the next day. I walked through the main entrance, past the trophy case filled with reading competition awards and perfect attendance certificates. The hallway smelled like disinfectant and childhood dreams, a combination that hit me harder than I'd expected.
The main office was staffed by Mrs. Henderson, who'd been the school secretary since before I was born. She looked up from her computer screen and did a double take that would have been comical under different circumstances. "Margaret Rodriguez? Is that really you?" "Hello, Mrs. Henderson. I was wondering if I could speak with Principal Davis for a moment." "Of course, dear. Let me see if he's available." She picked up her phone and pressed an extension. "Mr. Davis? There's someone here to see you. Margaret Rodriguez. Yes, Linda's daughter. The one from New York? Yes, Margaret Rodriguez." Principal Davis appeared in his doorway 30 seconds later, a tall man in his 60s who'd taken over the school 5 years earlier when his predecessor retired. He had the look of someone who'd spent his career trying to do good work with insufficient resources. "Ms. Rodriguez, what an honor. Please come into my office." His office was small and cramped, filled with student artwork and motivational posters about the importance of education. I sat in a chair designed for parent conferences, feeling like a giant in a dollhouse. "What brings you to Millfield Elementary?" he asked, settling behind his desk. "I wanted to discuss my parents' employment contracts." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Principal Davis's friendly demeanor shifted into something more guarded. "I'm not sure I understand." I pulled out my phone and showed him a document Marcus had provided, a copy of the standard employment contract used by the Millfield School District. Section 12, subsection C, the morality clause. It states that teachers can be terminated for conduct that reflects poorly on the institution or the community. Principal Davis glanced at the document, then back at me. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm not sure what you're getting at." "I'm getting at the fact that my parents, Robert and Linda Rodriguez, have just accepted a significant financial gift from someone they've publicly rejected as their daughter. They've taken money from a person they claim is an embarrassment to the family.
Some might consider that hypocritical behavior. The color drained from Principal Davis's face. Are you threatening your parents' jobs? I'm simply pointing out that their recent actions might raise questions about their judgment and character. The school board might be interested to know that two of their teachers have been accepting large sums of money from someone they've described as morally objectionable. It was a bluff, of course. I had no intention of actually trying to get my parents fired. But Principal Davis didn't know that, and the fear in his eyes told me the message had been received. Ms. Rodriguez, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. Your parents are excellent teachers, pillars of this community. Are they? Because pillars of the community don't usually ban their own daughters from Christmas dinner, do they? Pillars of the community don't usually accept $250,000 gifts from people they claim to be ashamed of. The color drained from Principal Davis's face. Are you threatening your parents' jobs? I'm simply pointing out that their recent actions might raise questions about their judgment and character. The school board might be interested to know that two of their teachers have been accepting large sums of money from someone they've described as morally objectionable. It was a bluff, of course. I had no intention of actually trying to get my parents fired. But Principal Davis didn't know that, and the fear in his eyes told me the message had been received. Ms. Rodriguez, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. Your parents are excellent teachers, pillars of this community. Are they? Because pillars of the community don't usually ban their own daughters from Christmas dinner, do they? Pillars of the community don't usually accept $250,000 gifts from people they claim to be ashamed of. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. I'm not asking you to do anything, Principal Davis. I'm simply making sure you're aware of the situation, in case questions arise, in case the school board starts wondering about the judgment of teachers who bite the hand that feeds them. I left him sitting there, stunned and terrified, and walked back to the Mercedes. Another message sent, another demonstration of what happened when you crossed Margaret Rodriguez. The flight back to New York was turbulent, the plane bucking through winter storm clouds that seemed to mirror my emotional state. I'd accomplished what I set out to do, shown my parents exactly what they'd thrown away, forced them to accept help whether they wanted it or not, and made it clear that their rejection had consequences. So why did I feel so empty? My phone buzzed constantly during the flight. Text messages from numbers I didn't recognize, voicemails from reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story, emails from business associates who'd heard rumors. Word was spreading, the way it always does in small towns where nothing interesting ever happened. The first call came from my Uncle Miguel as we were landing at Teterboro. "Margaret, what the hell did you do?" I could hear voices in the background, family members, probably gathering to discuss the crisis I'd created. "I paid off Mom and Dad's mortgage. Merry Christmas to them." You can't just... Jesus, Margaret, you can't just force money on people like that. Why not? I force business deals on people all the time. It's called negotiation. This isn't business. This is family. Is it? Because families don't usually ban each other from Christmas dinner. Miguel was quiet for a moment. "Look, I don't know what happened between you and your parents, but this isn't the way to fix it." "There's nothing to fix, Uncle Miguel. They made their choice. I just wanted to make sure they understood what that choice cost them." The second call came as my driver was taking me back to Manhattan. My cousin Danny, his voice strained and careful. "Margaret, my kids are asking questions. They heard Mom and Dad talking about what you did, and now Sophia wants to know if you're going to pay off our house too." I laughed, surprising myself. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that's not how family works, that we take care of ourselves." Good lesson, very principled. "Don't be like this, Margaret. Don't turn into someone bitter and cruel." "I'm not bitter, Danny. I'm clear. For the first time in my adult life, I'm completely clear about where I stand with this family." The third call came at midnight, just as I was getting ready for bed. Mom's number on my caller ID, a sight that made my stomach clench despite everything that had happened. "Margaret?" Her voice was small, defeated. "Yes." "Why did you do this to us?" The question hung between us, weighted with 35 years of complicated love and mutual disappointment. "Because you needed to understand what you were throwing away." "We never wanted to throw you away. We just We wanted you to understand how other people feel. And I wanted you to understand how I feel. Being rejected by your own parents because you're too successful. Being made to feel like an embarrassment because you worked hard and achieved something.
Mom was crying now, soft sobs that carried through the phone like accusations. "We're going to have to give the money back," she said. "You can't. It's already been processed. The mortgage is paid. The funds are deposited. It's done. Then we'll donate it. We'll give it all to charity. That's your choice. But you'll still have lived in a house I paid for. You'll still have accepted help from the daughter you were too ashamed to invite for Christmas. Margaret, please." I hung up. The next morning brought a flood of consequences I hadn't anticipated. The story had somehow leaked to the local newspaper, then been picked up by regional outlets, then gone viral on social media. "Billionaire daughter forces Christmas gift on parents who rejected her" was trending on Twitter. Cable news shows were calling for interviews. My publicist was fielding dozens of requests from talk shows and magazines. Some of the coverage was sympathetic, painting me as a generous daughter betrayed by ungrateful parents, but much of it was critical, portraying me as a vindictive rich woman who'd used her wealth to humiliate her working-class family. The worst part was that both versions were true. By December 22nd, my parents had become reluctant celebrities. News vans were parked outside their house, reporters were ambushing them on their way to work. The school district had called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation involving two of their teachers. I watched it all from my penthouse, drinking wine that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and feeling like I'd won a war that I no longer wanted to fight. Because power, I was learning, was a double-edged sword. I'd wanted to show my parents what they'd lost when they rejected me, but in the process, I'd also shown the world what I'd become, someone who would use her wealth as a weapon against the people who'd raised her. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I wondered if maybe my parents had been right to be afraid of me after all. Christmas Eve found me alone in my penthouse, surrounded by 12,000 square feet of marble and silence. The city sparkled below me like a jewelry box, millions of lights twinkling in windows where families were gathering, where children were dreaming of Santa Claus, where people who loved each other were choosing to be together. I'd spent the last 4 days watching my parents' lives unravel on national television. The media attention had grown beyond anything I'd anticipated. Their small house was under siege by reporters and cameramen. Dad had taken leave from school after parents started calling to complain about the drama affecting their children's education. Mom was hiding in the house, afraid to go to the grocery store because strangers recognized her as the ungrateful mother who rejected her billionaire daughter's Christmas gift. The narrative had taken on a life of its own. Social media was divided between people calling me a saint and people calling me a monster. Hashtag ungrateful parents was trending alongside hashtag toxic wealth. Think pieces were being written about family dynamics, generational trauma, and the corrupting influence of extreme wealth. Everyone had an opinion about Margaret Rodriguez and her parents. Everyone, except Margaret Rodriguez herself, who was sitting in a $20 million apartment, drinking wine, and wondering when exactly she'd become the villain in her own story. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason Chen. "Margaret, the Tokyo deal is falling apart. Nakamura's team is asking questions about your family situation. They're concerned about working with someone who would publicly humiliate her own parents. Call me." I stared at the message for a long time. The Tokyo deal represented 18 months of work and would have made me the first woman to own controlling interests in companies across 4 continents. It was supposed to be my crowning achievement, the deal that proved I belonged at the very top of the global business hierarchy. But Hiroshi Nakamura was old-school Japanese business culture, where family honor and respect for elders were sacred. To him, a daughter who would weaponize her wealth against her parents wasn't someone he could trust with his life's work. I'd won the battle with my parents and lost a war I didn't even know I was fighting. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent so much energy proving I was better than the small-minded people who'd raised me that I'd become someone smaller than they'd ever been. At midnight on Christmas Eve, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called my travel coordinator. "Helen, I need the jet ready to go in 2 hours. The destination is Toledo Executive Airport." "Ma'am, it's Christmas Eve. The crew..."
I'll pay triple time for everyone. This can't wait. The flight to Ohio gave me time to think about what I was going to say, how I was going to fix the mess I'd created. But every speech I rehearsed in my head sounded hollow, inadequate for the damage I'd done. By the time we landed, it was 3 a.m. on Christmas morning. I rented a car at the airport, something I hadn't done in years, and drove myself through the empty streets of Millfield. The media circus had disappeared for the holiday, leaving behind only the quiet normalcy of a small town on Christmas morning. I parked outside 1247 Maple Street and sat in the car for 20 minutes, watching the house where I'd grown up. No lights were on, but I could see the faint glow of the Christmas tree through the living room window. The same tree they put up every year with the same angel on top that I'd made in second grade art class. I walked to the front door and used my key one last time. The house was dark and quiet, but I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. I followed the sound and found my parents sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by documents, bank statements, legal papers, printed emails. They looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and I was shocked by how much they'd aged in just 5 days. Margaret whispered, "What are you doing here?" I came to apologize. Dad laughed, but there was no humor in it. For which part? For paying off our mortgage without asking? For threatening my job? For turning our lives into a media circus? For all of it. For everything. I sat down at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where I'd done homework while Mom graded papers, where we'd planned my future without knowing it would lead us here. I was angry, I said. I was hurt that you didn't want me at Christmas, and I wanted to hurt you back. So I used the one weapon I had, my money, to force you to accept help you didn't want. Mom was crying again, tears she'd probably been holding back for days. We never wanted to hurt you, Mija. We didn't know how to be around you anymore. You became someone so different from the little girl we raised. I became someone you taught me to be, I said softly. You taught me to work hard, to never give up, to reach for more than what I started with. I did exactly what you raised me to do. I just did it better than you expected. Dad was staring at the papers spread across the table. We've been trying to figure out how to give the money back. Our lawyer says it's complicated because you structured it as a gift, not a loan. Keep it.
They both looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Keep the money. Use it to travel, to fix the roof, to help Sophia with college when she's older. Use it to be comfortable for the first time in your adult lives. We can't, Mom said. Not after everything that's happened. Yes, you can, because it was never about the money. It was about love and pride and fear and all the ways families hurt each other when they stop talking and start assuming. I reached across the table and took both their hands. I'm sorry I made you feel small. I'm sorry I used my success as a weapon instead of a gift. And I'm sorry I turned our private family pain into public entertainment. Dad squeezed my hand, and I realized it was the first time he'd touched me with affection in years. We're sorry too, he said. We're sorry we couldn't be proud of you without feeling like failures ourselves. We're sorry we pushed you away instead of learning how to love the woman you became. We sat there in the dark kitchen, 3 people who'd forgotten how to be a family, but were willing to learn again. I have a proposition, I said. I'll fix the media situation. I'll make a statement that takes responsibility for what happened and asks everyone to leave you alone. In exchange, I want you to come to New York for New Year's Eve. Stay in my guest room. Let me show you the life I built, not to impress you, but to help you understand who I am now. Mom and Dad looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that couples who've been married for 40 years can have with just their eyes. Okay, Mom said finally, but we're paying for our own plane tickets. I laughed, and for the first time in weeks, it felt genuine. Deal. We spent Christmas morning the way we used to when I was little. Mom made her famous cinnamon rolls, Dad put on his ridiculous Santa hat, and we opened presents under the tree. I'd brought gifts from New York, but the best present was the one we gave each other, forgiveness. Later that day, I held a press conference in the parking lot of Millfield Elementary School. I stood in front of the cameras and microphones and told the truth about what had happened, about the mistakes I'd made, about the lessons I'd learned. I used my wealth as a weapon against people I love, I said.
I let my hurt feelings turn me into someone I didn't recognize. My parents raised me to be better than that, and I forgot their lessons when I needed them most. The media attention died down within a week, the way it always does when the person at the center of the storm stops providing entertainment. The Tokyo deal fell through, but 6 months later, I closed an even bigger partnership with a consortium of European companies who appreciated my honesty about my failures as much as my success in business. My parents came to New York for New Year's Eve, and then for Easter, and then for my birthday. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt what I'd almost destroyed. They learned to be proud of my success without feeling diminished by it. I learned to share my life without making them feel small. On Christmas Eve, 1 year later, I sat in the same kitchen where we'd reconciled, helping Mom roll out pie crust while Dad argued with the television about a basketball game. The house still smelled like vanilla candles and childhood memories, but now it also smelled like home. Because I'd learned something that no business school had ever taught me. Success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. Money is just numbers on a screen if it can't buy you the things that actually matter: love, forgiveness, and the chance to become better than you were. I still fly my private jet, still close billion-dollar deals, still live in a penthouse that overlooks Central Park. But now, I also sit at kitchen tables and help my mother bake pies and listen to my father tell stories about his students. I'd spent years trying to prove I was more than the small-town girl from Millfield, Ohio. But the most important thing I ever learned was how to come home again. Not as the woman who'd left, but as the woman who'd finally figured out what success really meant. And it meant having somewhere to belong, no matter how high you climbed or how far you traveled. It meant being Margaret Rodriguez, daughter of Robert and Linda, who'd learned to use her power to build bridges instead of walls. It meant never having to spend Christmas alone again. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.